7 biblical signs God is waiting for you to believe in Him. There are moments in life when the greatest struggle is not external, but internal. You may be doing the right things. You may be praying, working, trying to move forward, and still feeling uncertain about what comes next. Doors do not open as quickly as expected. Answers do not arrive as clearly as hoped. Progress feels slower than it should. And in the quiet spaces of your thoughts, a difficult question begins to form. Is God waiting for something from me? Many people assume that faith is simply believing that God exists, but Scripture reveals something deeper. Faith is not only about acknowledging God, it is about trusting Him enough to act, to wait, to continue, and sometimes to move forward without full clarity. Faith is not a feeling that appears suddenly. It is a decision that grows gradually through experience, reflection, and repeated moments of uncertainty. This is where many spiritual journeys become complicated. You may believe in God with your mind, yet still struggle to trust Him with your future. You may know the promises of Scripture, yet feel hesitant to rely on them when life becomes unpredictable. You may want certainty before commitment, reassurance before obedience, or clarity before action. These tensions are not signs of weak faith. They are signs of a developing one. Throughout the Bible, God often allowed seasons of waiting before movement, not because He was distant, but because trust was still forming, not because He was silent, but because belief had not yet matured into confidence. Faith, in many cases, became the turning point that transformed hesitation into progress. The moment a person trusted God more than their fear, change began to unfold. Psychologically, belief reshapes perception. When trust increases, anxiety decreases. When confidence grows, decisions become clearer. A person who believes deeply begins to act differently. They become more patient, more steady, and more willing to endure uncertainty. Faith does not remove difficulty, but it changes how difficulty is interpreted. Spiritually, belief creates alignment. It allows the heart, the mind, and the will to move in the same direction. Without belief, effort feels scattered. With belief, effort becomes focused. This alignment often marks the beginning of transformation because actions start reflecting trust rather than doubt. Many people do not realize that God is not always waiting to change their circumstances first. Sometimes He is waiting for trust to develop within them. He is waiting for belief to become strong enough to sustain responsibility. He is waiting for confidence to replace hesitation. He is waiting for faith to mature into commitment. This process is not about proving loyalty to God. It is about preparing the person for what comes next. In this message, we will explore 7 biblical signs that God may be waiting for you to believe in Him more deeply, not in theory, but in practice. These signs do not appear as dramatic events. They often show up as quiet shifts in perspective, repeated lessons in patience, and moments when life asks you to trust before you fully understand. Recognizing these signs can bring clarity to seasons that once felt confusing. They can reveal that waiting is not wasted time, but preparation. Because sometimes the greatest change in life does not begin when circumstances improve. It begins when belief becomes stronger than uncertainty. The first sign that God may be waiting for you to believe in Him is this. You begin to understand that waiting is not always a sign of stagnation, but a period of preparation. There may have been a time when waiting felt like rejection. You prayed for direction, yet clarity did not arrive. You worked toward a goal, yet progress seemed slow. You expected movement, yet life remained still. In those moments, waiting felt like something was wrong. It felt like God was distant, silent, or unwilling to act. But then, something begins to shift in your understanding. You start noticing that waiting produces change within you. You become more patient than before. You begin thinking more carefully about your decisions. You develop endurance that did not exist in earlier seasons. What once felt like wasted time slowly reveals itself as a period of growth. The delay that frustrated you begins shaping qualities that could not be developed quickly. Scripture often presents waiting as a process of formation rather than inactivity. Many individuals in the Bible experienced long periods of uncertainty before stepping into their purpose. They waited for direction, for maturity, for timing. These seasons were not empty. They were instructional. Waiting strengthened their character, clarified their priorities, and prepared them for responsibilities they could not yet carry. Psychologically, waiting builds resilience. When progress slows, people are forced to confront discomfort. They learn to manage uncertainty. They discover how to remain steady without immediate reward. This process strengthens emotional stability because it teaches perseverance. Instead of relying on quick results, they begin trusting consistent effort. Spiritually, waiting often reveals the difference between desire and readiness. You may want something deeply, yet still need preparation before receiving it. God does not delay growth to create frustration. He allows time to shape judgment, discipline, and endurance. These qualities protect you once the opportunity finally arrives. Over time, this awareness changes how you interpret stillness. Instead of assuming that nothing is happening, you begin looking for internal change. You pay attention to how your mindset evolves. You notice how your reactions become calmer. You recognize how your expectations become more realistic. Waiting becomes less threatening because it begins to make sense. This shift also builds trust. When you understand the purpose of waiting, anxiety decreases. You become more comfortable with uncertainty because you recognize its value. You learn that progress is not always visible immediately. Sometimes it develops quietly beneath the surface, preparing you for future movement. Many people later recognize that the seasons they once feared were the seasons that shaped them the most. It was during waiting that their patience strengthened. It was during uncertainty that their judgment matured. It was during delay that their character became stable enough to carry responsibility. What once felt like absence became preparation. When you begin to see waiting differently, it is often not because circumstances have changed. It is because your perspective has matured. And through that growing understanding, God may be waiting for you to believe that preparation is happening, even when progress is not yet visible. The second sign that God may be waiting for you to believe in Him is this. You begin to realize that fear is losing its authority over your decisions. There may have been a time when fear guided many of your choices. You avoided opportunities because they felt uncertain. You postponed decisions because the outcome was unclear. You hesitated to move forward because the risk seemed too high. In those moments, fear appeared reasonable. It felt protective. It felt responsible. Acting cautiously seemed safer than stepping into the unknown. But then something begins to shift. You start recognizing how fear limits growth. You notice how opportunities disappear when hesitation becomes a habit. You see how progress slows when uncertainty creates avoidance. You realize that waiting for complete security often leads to missed possibilities. This awareness does not remove fear, but it changes how you respond to it. At first, this realization can feel unsettling. You may feel tension between safety and progress. You may struggle with decisions that require courage. You may sense that remaining comfortable is no longer an option, yet stepping forward still feels risky. This inner conflict often signals development, not instability. Scripture frequently connects faith with courage. Throughout the Bible, individuals faced moments where fear was present, yet action was still required. They did not move forward because they felt fearless. They moved forward because they trusted that God would remain present even in uncertainty. Courage in these cases was not the absence of fear. It was the decision to act despite it. Psychologically, this shift reflects growing confidence. When people confront fear repeatedly, they develop resilience. They learn that discomfort is temporary. They discover that uncertainty does not always lead to failure. Each experience strengthens their ability to make decisions without being controlled by anxiety. Over time, fear becomes information rather than instruction. Spiritually, this change often marks the beginning of deeper belief. God does not always remove fear immediately. Instead, He allows situations that require trust. He invites people to step forward while uncertainty still exists. Through these experiences, belief becomes practical rather than theoretical. Trust moves from words into action. Over time, this awareness transforms decision-making. You begin evaluating risks more carefully. You consider possibilities instead of only dangers. You become more willing to attempt new paths. This willingness creates momentum because decisions are guided by purpose rather than avoidance. This shift also builds stability. When fear loses control, confidence grows. You feel less trapped by uncertainty. You become more capable of adapting to change. Your judgment becomes clearer because it is not clouded by anxiety. Life begins to feel manageable again. Many people later recognize that learning to move forward despite fear changed the direction of their life. It was the moment when hesitation stopped controlling their decisions. It was the moment when courage replaced avoidance. It was the moment when belief became stronger than doubt. When you begin noticing that fear is no longer controlling your decisions, it is often not because life has become easier. It is because your trust is becoming stronger. And through that growing courage, God may be waiting for you to believe that His presence is more reliable than your fears. The third sign that God may be waiting for you to believe in Him is this: you begin to take steps forward even when you do not yet have complete clarity. There may have been a time when certainty felt like a requirement. You wanted clear answers before making decisions. You preferred guarantees before committing to action. You believed that confidence should come before movement. Waiting for reassurance felt responsible because it reduced the risk of making mistakes. Acting without full understanding seemed careless or premature. But then, something begins to shift. You start recognizing that certainty rarely arrives all at once. You notice how life often unfolds gradually. You see how understanding develops step by step rather than in a single moment. You realize that many important decisions cannot wait for perfect clarity. Progress begins when movement starts, not when all questions are resolved. At first, this realization can feel uncomfortable. You may feel tension between caution and progress. You may worry about making the wrong choice. You may hesitate because uncertainty still exists. Yet you also sense that remaining still will not create the answers you are seeking. This awareness introduces responsibility, not pressure. Scripture frequently connects faith with movement. Throughout the Bible, individuals were asked to take action before seeing the full outcome. They stepped forward without knowing every detail. They trusted direction even when the path was not fully visible. Their growth began when they chose obedience over hesitation. Psychologically, this shift reflects developing confidence. When people begin acting without complete certainty, they strengthen their ability to adapt. They learn that mistakes can be corrected. They discover that experience produces clarity. Each decision becomes an opportunity to learn rather than a test to pass. This mindset reduces fear because it replaces perfection with progress. Spiritually, this change often marks the transition from belief to trust. Belief acknowledges possibility. Trust creates movement. God often allows uncertainty to remain so that faith can develop through action. He invites people to step forward before everything feels secure. This process transforms faith from theory into practice. Over time, this awareness changes how you approach decisions. You begin focusing on direction rather than perfection. You become more willing to try, adjust, and continue. You stop waiting for ideal conditions. Instead, you move forward with the information you have. This approach creates momentum because progress becomes consistent. This shift also builds resilience. When you act without complete certainty, you become more flexible. You learn how to respond to unexpected outcomes. You develop patience with yourself. Confidence grows because experience replaces hesitation. Life begins to feel less overwhelming because movement replaces stagnation. Many people later recognize that their life began changing when they stopped waiting for perfect clarity. It was the moment when hesitation gave way to action. It was the moment when fear lost its authority. It was the moment when trust became practical rather than theoretical. When you begin acting before you have complete certainty, it is often not because you are careless. It is because your faith is becoming active. And through that willingness to move forward, God may be waiting for you to believe that progress begins with the first step, not with perfect understanding. The fourth sign that God may be waiting for you to believe in Him is this. You begin to release the need to control how everything turns out. There may have been a time when control felt like security. You tried to plan every detail. You analyzed every possibility. You worked hard to predict outcomes so that nothing would go wrong. Managing situations carefully seemed responsible. Holding control over results felt like protection against disappointment. But then, something begins to shift. You start realizing how exhausting constant control can be. You notice how much energy is spent trying to manage circumstances that cannot be fully predicted. You see how anxiety increases when outcomes depend on factors beyond your influence. You begin understanding that control has limits. This realization does not create weakness, it creates perspective. At first, this awareness can feel unsettling. You may feel vulnerable when you release control. You may worry that things will fall apart if you stop managing every detail. You may feel tension between responsibility and surrender. This struggle often marks the beginning of growth because it forces you to distinguish between effort and control. Scripture often connects trust with surrender. Throughout the Bible, individuals learned that responsibility includes action, but not domination over results. They prepared, they worked, and they remained faithful, yet they accepted that outcomes were not entirely theirs to command. This understanding protected them from frustration because it allowed peace to coexist with effort. Psychologically, letting go of control strengthens emotional stability. When people accept uncertainty, stress decreases. They focus on what they can influence rather than what they cannot. This shift improves concentration because energy is directed toward meaningful action instead of constant worry. Over time, confidence grows because effort becomes purposeful rather than anxious. Spiritually, this change reflects deeper belief. God often teaches faith by revealing the limits of human control. He allows situations where effort is necessary, but certainty is impossible. Through these experiences, people learn to trust His guidance even when results remain uncertain. This process transforms faith from dependency on outcomes into confidence in God's presence. Over time, this awareness changes how you approach challenges. You continue working diligently, but with less tension. You prepare carefully, but without panic. You make decisions responsibly, but without obsessing over every possibility. This balance creates stability because effort becomes steady rather than frantic. This shift also builds peace. When control is released, worry loses intensity. You become more patient with delays. You feel less threatened by uncertainty. Confidence increases because trust replaces pressure. Life begins to feel manageable again, even when circumstances remain unpredictable. Many people later recognize that learning to release control marked the moment when their faith matured. It was the moment when responsibility became balanced with surrender. It was the moment when anxiety lost its grip. It was the moment when trust became stronger than the need for certainty. When you begin letting go of control over outcomes, it is often not because you care less about results. It is because you are learning to trust more deeply. And through that growing surrender, God may be waiting for you to believe that His guidance is more reliable than your control. The fifth sign that God may be waiting for you to believe in Him is this: you begin to understand that doubt does not disqualify your faith. Instead, it often reveals where faith still needs to grow. There may have been a time when doubt felt like failure. You questioned your direction. You wondered whether your prayers were heard. You struggled to understand why certain situations continued longer than expected. In those moments, doubt felt like weakness. It felt like something was wrong with your faith. You may have tried to hide those questions, believing that strong believers should not struggle with uncertainty. But then, something begins to shift. You start recognizing that doubt can be honest. You notice how questions lead to reflection. You see how uncertainty encourages deeper thinking. You realize that pretending to be certain does not create stronger faith. Honest examination does. This awareness does not remove doubt immediately, but it changes how you interpret it. At first, this realization can feel relieving. You begin allowing yourself to ask difficult questions. You become more willing to explore your thoughts. You stop assuming that uncertainty means failure. Instead, you begin viewing doubt as an invitation to seek understanding. This shift introduces maturity because it replaces fear with curiosity. Scripture often presents doubt as part of spiritual growth. Throughout the Bible, individuals experience moments of hesitation. They questioned their circumstances. They struggled to understand God's timing. Yet these moments did not separate them from faith. They strengthened it. Their trust deepened because they confronted uncertainty rather than ignoring it. Psychologically, acknowledging doubt strengthens resilience. When people face uncertainty directly, they develop emotional strength. They learn to tolerate ambiguity. They become less dependent on immediate answers. This process builds confidence because it teaches patience. Over time, uncertainty becomes manageable rather than overwhelming. Spiritually, this change reflects authentic belief. God does not require perfect certainty. He invites honest trust. He understands that faith develops gradually through experience. By allowing questions, He creates space for understanding. This process transforms faith from blind acceptance into thoughtful confidence. Over time, this awareness changes how you approach challenges. You become less afraid of uncertainty. You remain committed even when answers are incomplete. You continue moving forward despite unanswered questions. This persistence creates stability because faith becomes steady rather than fragile. This shift also builds depth. When doubt is acknowledged rather than suppressed, belief becomes more meaningful. You understand your faith more clearly. You trust more intentionally. Confidence grows because it is supported by reflection rather than assumption. Many people later recognize that their faith became stronger when they stopped fearing their questions. It was the moment when uncertainty became growth. It was the moment when honesty replaced pretense. It was the moment when trust became real. When you begin seeing doubt differently, it is often not because your faith has weakened. It is because your faith is becoming more honest. And through that honesty, God may be waiting for you to believe that questions can lead you closer to Him, not farther away. The sixth sign that God may be waiting for you to believe in Him is this: you begin to recognize that small, consistent steps of trust are quietly reshaping the course of your life. There may have been a time when you expected change to arrive suddenly. You looked for dramatic breakthroughs. You hoped for clear signs, decisive moments. or immediate transformation. You believed that faith would produce quick results, and when those results did not appear, disappointment followed. Progress seemed invisible, and effort felt uncertain. But then, something begins to shift. You start noticing the influence of small decisions. You become aware of how daily habits shape long-term outcomes. You see how patience in one situation prevents conflict in another. You recognize how a single responsible choice creates stability over time. What once seemed insignificant begins revealing its power. At first, this awareness can feel surprising. You may realize that growth is happening more slowly than expected, yet more consistently than before. You may notice that your reactions have become calmer. You may see that your judgment has improved. These changes may appear subtle, but they carry lasting impact. This realization introduces confidence because progress becomes visible. Scripture often connects faith with persistence. Throughout the Bible, individuals experienced transformation through repeated actions rather than sudden events. They remained steady in their commitments. They continued acting responsibly even when results were delayed. Their consistency created momentum, and that momentum eventually produced change. Psychologically, small actions strengthen discipline. When people repeat positive behaviors, those behaviors become habits. Habits reduce uncertainty because they create structure. Over time, discipline becomes automatic. This process builds confidence because progress feels reliable. Stability develops because effort becomes routine. Spiritually, this change reflects developing trust. God often works through gradual growth rather than dramatic intervention. He encourages consistent obedience. He values steady effort. By allowing change to unfold slowly, he builds resilience. This process ensures that progress remains sustainable rather than temporary. Over time, this awareness changes how you measure success. You begin focusing on direction rather than speed. You value consistency more than intensity. You recognize that lasting change requires patience. This perspective reduces frustration because progress becomes measurable through daily actions. This shift also builds hope. When small steps produce visible improvement, confidence increases. You feel encouraged because your effort creates results. You become more willing to continue because progress feels achievable. Life begins to feel purposeful again, even when transformation remains gradual. Many people later recognize that their lives changed not through one dramatic decision, but through many quiet ones. It was the steady commitment to doing what was right each day that created stability. It was the consistent effort to trust God in small moments that produced lasting growth. It was the accumulation of simple actions that shaped their future. When you begin noticing the power of small acts of faith, it is often not because circumstances have suddenly improved. It is because your consistency has created momentum. And through that steady progress, God may be waiting for you to believe that transformation often begins with small, faithful steps taken every day. The seventh sign that God may be waiting for you to believe in Him is this: you begin to understand that trust often has to come before clarity. There may have been a time when understanding felt like a requirement for obedience. You wanted to know how things would work before committing to a decision. You looked for explanations before taking action. You hoped for reassurance before moving forward. This approach felt logical because understanding reduces uncertainty. Knowing the outcome makes risk feel manageable, but then something begins to shift. You start noticing that many important decisions in life do not come with full explanations. You may face situations where the path ahead is unclear. You may encounter choices that require courage without guarantees. You may realize that waiting for complete understanding can lead to paralysis. This awareness introduces tension because it challenges the belief that certainty must come first. At first, This realization can feel uncomfortable. You may feel hesitant when clarity is missing. You may worry about making mistakes. You may feel pressure to delay action until everything makes sense. Yet you also begin sensing that growth requires movement, even when understanding remains incomplete. Scripture often connects faith with trust before explanation. Throughout the Bible, individuals were called to act before they fully understood the outcome. They stepped forward without knowing every detail. They trusted direction even when answers were limited. Their faith grew because they chose trust over hesitation. Psychologically, this shift reflects developing confidence in uncertainty. When people learn to trust without full understanding, they strengthen resilience. They become more adaptable to change. They develop patience with complexity. This mindset reduces anxiety because it replaces the demand for certainty with acceptance of process. Spiritually, this change often marks a turning point in belief. God does not always provide complete explanations before asking for trust. He allows uncertainty to remain so that faith can mature. He invites people to rely on His guidance even when outcomes are unclear. This process transforms belief from intellectual agreement into relational confidence. Over time, this awareness changes how you interpret confusion. Instead of viewing uncertainty as failure, you begin seeing it as an opportunity to trust. Instead of resisting the unknown, you become willing to move forward despite it. This willingness creates momentum because action becomes possible without perfect clarity. This shift also builds peace. When trust replaces the need for constant explanation, worry decreases. You become more patient with delays. You feel less threatened by uncertainty. Confidence grows because your faith is rooted in relationship rather than information. Many people later recognize that their faith matured when they stopped demanding answers before trusting God. It was the moment when control gave way to confidence. It was the moment when fear lost its authority. It was the moment when trust became the foundation of their decisions. This message reflects a spiritual understanding shaped through experience, reflection, and the steady process of learning to rely on God over time. Growth rarely happens in dramatic moments. It develops through repeated decisions to trust, even when clarity is limited. Each step of faith becomes part of a larger journey of maturity and transformation. If something in this message helped you reflect on your own faith, share in the comments which sign spoke to you the most. You can also write a simple commitment: I will trust God before I understand. Because belief is not proven when everything is clear. It is proven when you choose to trust, even when the path is still unfolding.